The rain had begun in the early evening, tapping against the window panes in a rhythm so persistent that it seemed less like weather and more like a deliberate intrusion. By midnight, the storm had grown furious, lashing the streets of West London with a wildness that rattled doors, loosened tiles, and left the quiet suburban lane where the Beresfords lived looking half-drowned under shifting veils of water. Inside, however, the fire burned brightly in the hearth, and the small sitting room held all the warmth and comfort of a space long tended by Tuppence's care. Books were stacked haphazardly on the side table, the curtains were thick enough to keep the draught at bay, and the scent of cocoa lingered faintly from the pot the corner grocer had sent round earlier that week. Tommy stretched in his armchair, pushing aside the newspaper whose headlines had been as dismal as the weather. "Do you know," he said, glancing across at his wife, "the most tragic thing about English winters is that no amount of central heating, or what passes for it, quite removes the necessity of cocoa at midnight." Tuppence looked up from her knitting, her needles clicking steadily. "Cocoa at midnight is hardly tragic, Tommy. It's practically heroic. It keeps civilization from collapse." "Then perhaps we should make it a ritual," Tommy mused. "A sort of midnight toast to endurance. Only problem is, the shops will think us rather eccentric if we begin ordering cocoa by the ton." The clock on the mantel ticked toward the hour with a solemnity that suited the storm. The house felt snug and isolated, as though the world beyond their windows had been swallowed up by the rain. For the Beresfords, this quiet domestic scene was rare enough to be treasured. The war years behind them, the restlessness of their earlier adventures tempered by age and responsibility, they had settled into the sort of evenings that others might call ordinary, but which Tommy and Tuppence secretly found restorative. Yet the night was not destined to remain ordinary. The first sound came so unexpectedly that both of them started. A knock, not tentative, not polite, but urgent, sounded at the front door. 3 raps, sharp and insistent, carrying above the roar of the storm. Tommy sat up, brows drawn. "Who on earth calls at this hour?" Tuppence set down her knitting and rose, her expression alert rather than alarmed. "You've answered your own question. Someone on earth, but very desperate." Tommy followed her into the hall, the floorboards creaking faintly beneath their feet. The second knock came before they had reached the door, echoing through the small house with a persistence that demanded response. Tuppence's hand hovered near the latch, but Tommy stepped forward and took her place. "Allow me. Midnight visitors often come with trouble attached, and I'd rather be the first to meet it." He unlatched the chain, pulled back the bolt, and opened the door to the storm. A figure stood on the threshold, drenched through, hair plastered against a pale face. A young woman, no more than her early 20s, eyes wide with a terror that seemed only half concealed by exhaustion. She clutched a sodden envelope to her chest as though it were her last possession of value. "Please," she gasped, her voice trembling as much as her body. I had to knock. Someone followed me. I couldn't. There was nowhere else." Tuppence, without hesitation, reached out and drew her across the threshold. "Come in at once. You're soaked to the bone." Tommy closed the door firmly against the gale, his eyes narrowing as he studied the girl. Her coat was torn at the shoulder, her shoes muddied, her hands shaking. She looked like someone who had run a great distance and at a great cost. "Sit by the fire," Tuppence urged, guiding her into the sitting room. She fetched a blanket from the arm of the sofa and wrapped it about the girl's trembling frame. "There now, you're safe." The young woman allowed herself to sink into the chair nearest the fire, the flames reflecting in eyes that darted nervously toward the curtained windows. She still clutched the envelope, refusing to relinquish it even as Tuppence pressed a warm cup into her hands. Tommy leaned against the mantel, arms folded. "You said you were followed. Who by?" The girl's lips parted, but for a moment no words came. She glanced at the envelope, then at Tommy and Tuppence in turn. "I don't know their names," she said at last, voice low. "But they don't mean me any good. I heard footsteps all the way from the station. I thought they'd catch me before I reached a door. Yours was the only light I saw." Tuppence exchanged a look with her husband. "She's terrified, Tommy. That alone tells us plenty." Tommy was not so easily swayed. "Fear tells us something, yes, but not everything. Who are you? And why would anyone follow you on a night like this?" The girl lowered her gaze to the envelope. Slowly, reluctantly, she held it out just far enough for the Beresfords to see. The paper was heavy, thick with the kind of quality that bespoke old money, old titles. Across one corner was embossed a faint but unmistakable crest, a raven perched upon a hollow branch. "I can't explain everything tonight," she said, her voice quivering, "only that this is what they're after. If they know I've brought it here—" She broke off as though the very words frightened her. Tuppence leaned closer, studying the crest with interest. "I don't recognize it. Do you, Tommy?" Tommy shook his head. "No, but I dare say someone at the yard might. Crests usually come with families, and families come with histories. Sometimes the darker the history, the thicker the paper." The girl clutched the envelope again, unwilling to release it. "Please, you must believe me. They want it. They'll do anything to get it." Before Tommy could press further, a sudden noise cut through the room, the faint crunch of footsteps on the gravel outside, retreating quickly, swallowed by the storm. The three froze, listening. Tuppence's eyes met Tommy's, her face pale. "You heard that?" "Yes," Tommy said grimly. He crossed to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peer out. The rain distorted everything, but he caught the blur of a figure slipping beyond the gate. Whoever had knocked at their door had not been mistaken. When he returned to the fire, his voice was firm. "Whoever's out there knows she came here, and they're not likely to forget it." The girl buried her face in her hands, shoulders trembling. Tuppence, her voice gentle but resolute, said, "You're safe for tonight. Whatever danger is waiting outside, it won't cross this threshold. Not while we're here." Tommy glanced again at the envelope, the raven crest glistening faintly in the firelight. He did not voice his thoughts, but one truth pressed heavily upon him. Their quiet midnight had been shattered. Something had arrived at their door that carried with it the weight of secrets, danger, and perhaps death. And whatever storm had begun outside, a darker one was already gathering within. The storm had not relented. It battered the windows with a persistence that felt personal, as though the night itself had conspired to keep danger close at hand. Inside the Beresfords' sitting room, however, the fire had regained its cheer, and the girl, still pale and shivering, was beginning to show signs of life. A blanket was wrapped tightly around her shoulders, and a steaming cup of cocoa trembled slightly in her hands as she lifted it. Tuppence, perched on the edge of the sofa with her usual mixture of curiosity and compassion, leaned forward. "You'll feel warmer soon, my dear. Nothing cures fright and chill like cocoa, except perhaps a slice of fruit-cake, but alas, we are not so well stocked." The girl attempted a faint smile, but her eyes remained troubled, fixed too often on the curtained window as though expecting the glass to break again at any moment. Tommy, standing by the mantelpiece, lit a cigarette and regarded her steadily through the smoke. "Now then," he said in a tone that balanced reassurance with interrogation, "perhaps you'll tell us who you are and why midnight visitors shadow you across London. Names, after all, are useful things." The girl hesitated, then drew herself up with an effort of composure. "My name is Eliza Harwood. I have been, for nearly 2 years now, companion to Lady Isabel Ravenhurst at her estate in Surrey. It was never an easy household, but lately, it has become unbearable." "Unbearable how?" Tuppence asked gently. Eliza lowered her gaze to the cup, tracing the rim with a finger. "I overheard a conversation I was not meant to hear, a matter of inheritance, of money, property, perhaps worse. I cannot be certain of all the details, but I know enough to say that if Lady Isabel were to pass on suddenly, there are those who would benefit handsomely." Tuppence's knitting lay forgotten in her lap. "And you think they know that you overheard them?" "I don't think. I know." Eliza's voice trembled, and she drew the sodden envelope closer to her chest as though to shield it. "This proves it." She held it out reluctantly. The thick paper bore again the embossed raven crest, its lines darkened by water, but unmistakable. "The crest of Ravenhurst Manor," Eliza explained. "It has been in the family for centuries. This envelope was hidden in the library behind a loose panel. I found it while tidying. Inside was this." She withdrew a single folded sheet, crumpled and torn at the edges, and handed it across. Tommy took it with care, smoothing it out upon the mantel. Only half a sentence remained legible, the rest apparently torn away. The will must never be, no more. Just those words, hanging incomplete yet ominous in their implication. Tommy tapped ash into the grate. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. One could finish that sentence in a number of ways. The will must never be found. The will must never be changed. Or perhaps more simply, the will must never be obeyed. Each possibility equally unpleasant. Tuppence frowned. And you believe this fragment is why you're being followed? Eliza nodded, her eyes darting again toward the window. I saw Sir Reginald, Lady Isabel's nephew, and Dr. Partridge, her physician, in the library that night. They spoke in low voices. I could only catch the words inheritance and too late. The next day the hiding place was empty, and that evening I began to notice footsteps when I walked to the village. Always behind me, always too close. Tommy leaned back in his chair, exhaling smoke thoughtfully. You see, Tuppence, how neat the story is. Aristocratic family, disputed inheritance, a half sentence to prove conspiracy. Almost too neat. Eliza flushed, hurt mingling with fear. You don't believe me. I believe you believe it, Tommy said evenly. But a detective must separate belief from fact. Tell me, Miss Harwood, why come to us? Why not the police? Her hands clenched the cup so tightly that the porcelain rattled. Because the police would think me mad. Because I have no evidence except that fragment. And because I was told once that the Beresfords had a reputation for helping people in trouble. I had nowhere else to turn. At that, Tuppence softened, reaching across to pat the girl's hand. You did right to come. We've always preferred people in trouble to people in perfect peace. They're far more interesting. Tommy rolled his eyes but said nothing, for his wife's instinct had guided them truly more often than his skepticism liked to admit. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm thundered, rattling the shutters. For a brief interval there was silence within, broken only by the steady ticking of the clock. At last Tommy spoke again, his voice cool. Miss Harwood, you said Lady Isabel is elderly. Frail? Yes. She is sharp of mind but weak of body. Her health declines each season. And her nephew, this Sir Reginald, eager no doubt to step into her shoes. He masks it with courtesy, but yes, everyone knows his debts. And Dr. Partridge, he has her ear, her trust. Too much of both, perhaps. Convenient for a man with medical access, Tommy murmured. He flicked the ash again, the sound sharp in the quiet room. But your story leaves holes. Why did you not go directly to Lady Isabel with this fragment? I tried, Eliza whispered, but she dismissed me. She thought I was imagining things, and Reginald, he was always near, always listening. Tuppence studied her thoughtfully. Well, truth or invention, you've brought us into it now, and if someone truly followed you through that storm, they will not stop easily. Almost as if in answer, a sudden crash shattered the calm. The front window splintered inward, shards scattering across the carpet. The three leapt to their feet, Eliza crying out in terror. A stone lay upon the rug, tied crudely with a strip of paper. Tommy seized it, unwrapped the sodden binding, and read aloud the words scrawled in bold, uneven hand. Send her out, or suffer. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. Eliza's face drained of colour. Tuppence drew her close, her own eyes flashing with sudden fury. How dare they? Tommy set the note upon the mantel beside the torn fragment, his jaw tightening. It seems, he said, that our midnight cocoa has been replaced with something rather more bracing. A conspiracy, an inheritance, a raven crest, and now threats through the window. Yes, Tuppence, our visitor brings danger indeed. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. Outside, the storm howled, and within, three figures knew that a single broken window had changed the course of their quiet night beyond recall. Morning in West London brought no sunshine, only a thin grey drizzle that clung to the rooftops and blurred the outlines of chimneys against the sky. The storm had passed, but its aftermath left the streets slick with puddles and the Beresfords' garden sodden and miserable. Inside the house, however, the sitting room bore the look of a battlefield tidied too hastily. Shards of last night's shattered window swept into a corner, a blanket draped over the chair where Eliza had sat trembling, and on the mantelpiece two mute exhibits, the torn fragment of a will and the threatening note tied around a stone. Tommy stood with his back to the fire, hands clasped behind him, his expression thoughtful. "Well, Tuppence, what do we make of it?" A young lady bursts in at midnight, brandishing a crest and a half-finished sentence. An hour later, our window is smashed with a message fit for melodrama. Shall we believe her tale at once, or exercise a little caution? Tuppence, busy at the writing desk with her notebook, looked up with a spark of impatience. "Exercise caution if you like, but I, for one, believe her. That girl's fear was genuine. You saw it in her eyes." Tommy allowed a faint smile. "I've seen genuine fear in poker players with only a pair of twos. Tommy! All the same," he continued, "I'll grant you she isn't lying about everything. That crest is real enough. I checked it in Debrett's once. A raven on a branch, the symbol of the Ravenhurst family of Surrey. Old, distinguished, and rumoured to be as quarrelsome a lot as ever inherited land and titles." Eliza Harwood, seated quietly near the hearth, raised her head. "It is true," she said softly. "Lady Isabel Ravenhurst is my employer. I have lived at the manor these past 2 years, and quarrelsome is too gentle a word." Her voice still carried exhaustion, but the warmth of the fire and Tuppence's determined kindness had restored some colour to her cheeks. She set down her untouched tea and clasped her hands tightly. "You must understand, the house is full of shadows, not merely from its age or its draughty passages, but from the people within it. Lady Isabel is frail yet strong-willed. Her nephew Reginald prowls like a wolf, polite in company but sharp with the servants. Dr. Partridge, ever genial, never far from her side, whispers advice that no one else may hear. And the rest of us, maids, footmen, even myself, we are little more than pieces to be moved about as they wish." Tuppence listened, eyes alight with interest. "It sounds positively poisonous. And the will? Tell us more of that." Eliza hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering her voice though the room was private. "Lady Isabel has changed her testament more than once. Each alteration stirs new resentments. Some say she wishes to leave the estate to charitable causes, others insist it must remain with the family. I heard whispers of a document hidden away, one that disinherited Reginald altogether. If that were true, and if it came to light, there are those who would lose everything." "And you," Tommy said quietly, "stumbled upon just enough to make yourself dangerous." She nodded miserably. Tuppence shut her notebook with a decisive snap. "Then there's no question. We must go down to Ravenhurst Manor and see for ourselves." Tommy raised his brows. "Must we?" "Yes, Tommy, we must. You can stand here doubting until the rain stops, but that girl's life is at stake. If someone is willing to hurl stones through windows in the middle of the night, they won't hesitate at worse." Her husband gave a resigned sigh, though there was amusement beneath it. "I suppose I should be grateful you married me for adventure and not for cocoa." "Cocoa is reliable. Adventure is better exercise," Tuppence retorted. Before Eliza could thank them, Tommy held up a hand. "One condition. Before we march off to Surrey, I intend to make a discreet inquiry. Scotland Yard hears whispers long before they make the newspapers. If there is talk of fraud or forgery at Ravenhurst, they'll know. And if our midnight guest is spinning fairy tales, better we learn it here than after a 2-hour train journey." By mid-morning, Tommy was striding through the familiar corridors of Scotland Yard, his coat still damp from the drizzle. Tuppence had insisted on remaining with Eliza, keeping her company, while Tommy sought the counsel of Inspector Grant, an old acquaintance who owed him more than one favour. Grant was a solid man, with a complexion that suggested he spent more time indoors than out. He greeted Tommy with a grunt and a handshake, ushering him into a cluttered office. "Beresford," he said, dropping into his chair. "Haven't seen you since that business with the counterfeiters in Brighton. What mischief are you bringing me today?" "None of mine," Tommy said mildly. "I come bearing mischief from Surrey. Tell me, have you heard any whispers about the Ravenhurst estate?" Grant leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Ravenhurst? Yes, there's been talk. Nothing firm enough to act upon, but talk nonetheless. Fraudulent dealings with bonds, unpaid debts, and rumours of a will gone missing. The name that comes up most often is Sir Reginald, Lady Isabel's nephew. He's up to his ears in debt. If the old lady cuts him out, he's finished." "And Dr. Partridge?" "Not much against him on paper. But clever men in country houses often hide their cleverness in inconvenient ways." Tommy absorbed this with a nod. "So there is smoke, if not fire." "Enough smoke to choke a man," Grant replied grimly. "But Beresford, If you're poking into Ravenhurst, tread carefully. That family closes ranks when threatened, and outsiders have a way of disappearing from the picture. I'll keep my wits about me, Tommy promised. When he returned to the house, Tuppence was waiting in the hallway, her coat already buttoned. Eliza stood beside her, anxious but resolute. "Well?" Tuppence demanded. "There are whispers aplenty," Tommy admitted. "Fraud, debts, a will conveniently mislaid. In short, Miss Harwood's story holds water, enough for us to take umbrellas." Tuppence's eyes flashed triumph. "Then it's settled. We go." The decision was not made lightly. Eliza packed a small valise with trembling hands while Tuppence gathered her own essentials, an umbrella stout enough to serve as weapon if needed, a notebook, and the firm resolve that had guided her through many an escapade. Tommy, meanwhile, arranged the practicalities: train tickets, discreet messages to a friend who could keep an eye on their London house, and a final inspection of the threatening note now tucked into his pocket. By early afternoon they were at Paddington Station, the platform alive with the bustle of porters and the hiss of steam. The drizzle had thickened into mist, lending the great iron arches of the station an air of foreboding grandeur. Eliza kept close to Tuppence, her eyes darting nervously over the crowd. "Courage," Tuppence murmured. "You've us now." Tommy, carrying the tickets, glanced casually about and noted a man in a dark overcoat loitering near the newspaper kiosk. He appeared to be studying the racing results, but shifted position whenever the trio moved. Tommy filed the observation away, saying nothing. Best not to alarm Eliza until he was certain. The whistle blew, and they boarded their train. The compartment smelled faintly of coal smoke and damp wool. Eliza sat by the window, staring out at the grey blur of the platform. Tommy slid the door shut, his voice low. "We must assume, Tuppence, that if there were eyes upon us in London, there will be eyes upon us still in Surrey. Our adventure begins under observation." Tuppence settled into her seat with a calm smile. "Then let them watch. They'll find we're not easily frightened." As the train jolted forward, carrying them out of the city and toward the shadowed countryside of Surrey, Eliza Harwood clasped her hands tightly in her lap. The raven crest, the torn will, the shattered window, all seemed to draw them onward into the heart of something dark and dangerous. Unseen on the platform, the man in the dark overcoat folded his newspaper, tucked it under his arm, and walked briskly toward the exit. His face betrayed nothing, but his purpose was clear. The Beresfords were not to make this journey unaccompanied. The countryside rushed past in streaks of green and grey, the air thick with promise of secrets. Ahead lay Ravenhurst Manor, a house of shadows waiting to reveal its truths, or to conceal them more deeply still. The train curved through the Surrey countryside, beneath a sky mottled with clouds that promised more rain. Grey light fell across hedgerows and fields, each blurred by a thin mist rising from the damp earth. Within the compartment, Eliza Harwood sat rigid, her eyes fixed on the landscape, though her thoughts were clearly elsewhere. Every so often she would start at the hiss of steam or the cry of a porter at a passing station, as though expecting pursuit even in daylight. Tuppence, with unshakable cheer, tried to draw her out. "You know, I've always thought the countryside looks most mysterious in weather like this. Every tree hides a conspirator, every lane winds toward a secret. Rather suitable for our errand, don't you think?" Tommy raised his newspaper, his expression dry. "One could also say it's suitable for rheumatism, but I won't dampen the romance." "You already have," Tuppence returned promptly, but she smiled. When at last the train slowed at a rural station, Eliza gathered her small valise with trembling hands. "It's not far now," she whispered. "Ravenhurst Manor lies 2 miles beyond the village. A carriage will be waiting." The state carriage, Tom, was indeed waiting. An aging vehicle drawn by 2 black horses, driven by a coachman who offered neither greeting nor smile. His weathered face betrayed no warmth as he loaded their bags. They rode in silence along lanes hemmed with dripping hedges until, turning a final corner, the house revealed itself. Ravenhurst Manor loomed against the grey sky, its tall gables and chimneys rising above a sweep of sodden lawn. Age clung to its walls in patches of lichen and ivy, while windows stared out like weary eyes. The stonework was noble but crumbling, grandeur persisted, but time had gnawed at the edges. As they entered through wrought iron gates, Tuppence leaned toward Tommy, Positively gothic. I do hope they've left a ghost or two about. Judging by Miss Harwood's tale, Tommy murmured, the living provides sufficient haunting. The carriage drew up before heavy oak doors, which opened even before they could knock. A maid stood waiting, her posture stiff, her eyes wary. "Eliza," she said in a low voice that betrayed more reproach than welcome, "so you've come back." "This is Clara," Eliza explained quickly, turning to the Beresfords. "She has served at Ravenhurst since girlhood." Clara dipped a curtsy that was more mechanical than cordial, her gaze lingering on the strangers with suspicion. "Lady Isabel is in the drawing-room. She will see you." They were led into a hall that once must have inspired awe. A wide staircase rose toward a gallery lined with ancestral portraits, their faces stern and disapproving in the dim light. The floor tiles were cracked, and the scent of damp lingered, but candles burned in wall sconces, throwing long flickers across the shadows. Lady Isabel Ravenhurst sat in a high-backed chair near the hearth of the drawing-room. She was small and frail, her silver hair arranged neatly, her shawl drawn close about her shoulders, yet her eyes, sharp and penetrating, missed nothing. "Eliza," she said, her voice soft but commanding, "and you bring friends?" "Old friends of mine, Lady Isabel," Eliza replied, "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford." Lady Isabel's gaze travelled over them with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Friends who arrive unannounced are seldom true friends. Still, you are welcome, for now." Tuppence inclined her head graciously. "We thank you, Lady Isabel. Your house has the air of history about it." "It has the air of decay, if truth be told," came a new voice. A man strode in with confidence that bordered on arrogance. He was tall, broad-shouldered, immaculately dressed, his dark hair slicked back. His smile was too ready, his eyes too hard. "My nephew, Sir Reginald," Lady Isabel said dryly. "He believes himself master already." Reginald gave a short laugh, bowing to the Beresfords. "You'll forgive my aunt's sharpness. Age makes one frank. And Eliza," his gaze turned cold as it fell on her, "I had thought you would be gone for good." Eliza shrank slightly under his stare, but Tuppence stepped smoothly forward. "On the contrary, Miss Harwood is fortunate to serve such a distinguished household, and to count us among her old acquaintances, of course." Reginald's smile thinned. Acquaintances have a way of appearing when estates are discussed. Before more could be said, another figure entered, a genial man with round spectacles and a kindly manner, his hands clasped behind his back. "Ah, our visitors," he said warmly. "Dr. Partridge at your service. Any friend of Eliza's is a friend of the house." "Even when the house does not share the opinion," Lady Isabel murmured, though her eyes twinkled with amusement. Tommy observed them all carefully, noting each flicker of expression. Reginald's hostility, Clara's nervous watchfulness, the physician's too smooth geniality, all catalogued silently. Dinner was served in the great hall, beneath a ceiling lost in shadows. The table groaned under silver and porcelain, though the food was modest compared with the grandeur of the setting. Candles cast wavering light over faces that betrayed more tension than appetite. Lady Isabel presided from the head of the table, her voice precise as she guided the conversation. "My nephew insists upon speaking of the estate as though it were already his. He forgets that wills are not inked until death claims the hand." Reginald's laugh was sharp. "Aunt, forgive me, but one must plan. Debts do not vanish by hope alone." Dr. Partridge interjected smoothly. "Let us not distress Lady Isabel with such talk. She requires peace, not quarrels." Tuppence, sipping her soup, watched them with interest. "Still, inheritances are fascinating things. They show us who we truly are. I always think a family's arguments over money tell us more than their histories and debrettes." Reginald turned his hard smile upon her. "And what do you think our family arguments tell you, Mrs. Beresford?" "That they are far from over," she said sweetly. The atmosphere tightened. Eliza shifted uncomfortably. Clara, serving from the sideboard, nearly dropped a dish when Reginald snapped at her. Accusations soon followed. Reginald leaned back, his voice casual but edged. "It seems to me certain items have gone missing from the library. Eliza, perhaps you know something of that?" Eliza flushed scarlet. "I? Never." Lady Isabel's eyes narrowed. "Theft is a grave charge, Reginald. Do you bring proof or only suspicion?" Suspicion often suffices, he said carelessly, though his gaze bored into Eliza. Tuppence intervened quickly, her tone light. Surely a household such as this mislays objects daily. I myself once lost an entire handbag behind a radiator. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved around the table, but the hostility remained. Tommy, calm and quiet, continued to observe. Each word, each glance, each nervous movement etched itself into his mind. This was a house thick with tension, and every person within it wore a mask, some more convincing than others. Later, as the household retired, the Beresfords were shown to a guest chamber with carved oak bedstead and faded tapestries. Eliza, pale but relieved to have their company, wished them good night before retreating to her own small room down the corridor. Tuppence drew the curtains against the mist outside. "Well, Tommy, what do you think?" "That the food was underwhelming, the company worse, and the atmosphere toxic enough to poison a regiment," he replied. She laughed softly. "And you catalogued them all, didn't you?" "Of course. Reginald, arrogant and in debt. Dr. Partridge, charming but slippery. Clara, fearful of something. Lady Isabel, frail yet shrewd. And poor Eliza, caught in the middle. A cast worthy of any melodrama." Tuppence shivered slightly. "And you think she told us the truth?" "Parts of it," Tommy said. "Enough to draw us here. The rest, time will reveal." It was near midnight when Tommy, restless, left their chamber to fetch a book he had noticed in the hall. The corridors were dim, lit only by wall lamps that hissed faintly. As he passed the grand staircase, he paused. There, upon the tiles, were footprints, muddy, damp, leading from the front door toward the library. He crouched, studying them. The soil was fresh, the pattern distinct. Someone had been abroad and returned only minutes ago. He straightened slowly, glancing around. The hall was silent. No doors opened. No voices called. The house slept, or pretended to. When he returned to the guest chamber, Tuppence looked up from her bed with raised brows. "Well?" "Footprints," Tommy said grimly. "Muddy ones, and no one admits to being awake." The shadows of Ravenhurst seemed to deepen around them, and Tommy knew the game had begun in earnest. Morning came reluctantly to Ravenhurst, with pale light seeping through heavy curtains, as though even the sun was reluctant to intrude upon the house's brooding atmosphere. The rain of the previous day had eased, leaving the lawns soaked and the gravel paths glistening. The air inside remained chill, as if the very walls resented warmth. Tommy, seated at the small escritoire in their guest chamber, polished his spectacles and reviewed notes scribbled hastily in his pocketbook the night before. The muddy footprints in the hall still nagged at him, though no explanation had yet been offered. Tuppence, already dressed and bright-eyed, fussed with her hair at the mirror. "It strikes me, Tommy," she said, "that Ravenhurst does not merely contain secrets, it positively breathes them. The question is, whose secrets are most dangerous?" "All of them," Tommy replied, "but it's our visitor who claims to know where the most important one is hidden." As though on cue, a knock sounded at the door. Eliza Harwood slipped inside, her face pale but determined. "I must show you something," she whispered, "something that will prove I told the truth." The library of Ravenhurst Manor was the kind of room that seemed to absorb whispers and swallow footsteps. Tall shelves lined with leather-bound volumes climbed toward a darkened ceiling, and heavy curtains muted the morning light. The scent of old paper and polish lingered. Eliza led them across the room with swift, nervous steps. "Here," she said, indicating a section of shelving near the far corner. She pressed her fingers along the panelling until a faint click sounded, and part of the wood swung back on hidden hinges. "A secret panel," Tuppence breathed with delight. "I knew this house would not disappoint." Eliza reached inside with trembling hands, then recoiled as though stung. "It's gone." The cavity was empty, dusty but undeniably bare. "I swear to you," she cried, turning to them in desperation, "the will was here. I saw it myself, wrapped in parchment and sealed with the raven crest. I thought if I brought you here you would believe me." Tommy examined the recess calmly, running his fingers over the dust. Gone indeed, and not recently. The dust shows something was removed within the last day or two. "Then someone knew," Tuppence said, glancing around. "Someone anticipated this discovery." Eliza pressed her hands to her face. "Now you'll think me a liar." "Not necessarily," Tommy murmured. but someone else wished us to think so. He moved to the fireplace, where faint wisps of ash still lingered. Kneeling, he sifted through the grate and withdrew a charred scrap of parchment. The edges were blackened, the centre half legible, a flourish of letters, part of a crest, and the word testament. "Well, well," he said softly, "it seems our missing document met an unfortunate fate." Tuppence leaned close. "Burnt deliberately, and not completely. Someone was in a hurry." The sound of footsteps made them all start. Clara, the maid, entered hesitantly with a tray of tea. Her eyes darted to the open panel, then to the fragment in Tommy's hand. The tray rattled. Tuppence, quick as ever, moved smoothly to intercept. "Clara, dear, such excellent timing. I've been dying for tea. Do set it down." Clara obeyed, her hands trembling. "You must find this room frightfully dull to dust," Tuppence said lightly, pouring tea as if nothing were amiss. "So many old books, so many secrets hidden in corners. Tell me, do you often see Sir Reginald in here at night?" The question was so sudden that Clara gasped, nearly dropping a cup. "How did you— no, madam, Tuppence smiled sweetly. "You needn't worry, we are all friends here. Just between us, did you see him in the library last night?" Clara's lips pressed tight, but her eyes betrayed her. Finally, in a rush, she whispered, "Yes, I saw him, near midnight. He told me I'd imagined it, that I must never mention it, but I know what I saw." Eliza gasped softly. "Then it was he who burned the will." But Tommy raised a hand. "Too neat, Tuppence. Far too neat. If Sir Reginald wished to conceal his movements, he could have bribed the girl or threatened her. Instead, he leaves her frightened and half ready to confess. No, I think this is bait. Someone wishes suspicion to fall heavily upon Reginald, perhaps too heavily." Clara fled with her tray, visibly relieved to escape the room. Eliza clutched at Tuppence's sleeve. "If the will is destroyed, then Lady Isabel is defenceless. Reginald will inherit everything, and I—" "You may yet be surprised," Tommy interrupted. "Parchment burns easily, but secrets do not. Someone in this house knows the truth of that document, and we must find out who." Later that morning, Dr. Partridge joined the the drawing room. His manner was genial, his spectacles gleaming, his hands folded behind his back as he addressed them in tones of studied concern. "I hear you've taken an interest in the library," he said smoothly. "A dangerous room, full of draughts and dust. Bad for Lady Isabel's health. And health, you know, is the most fragile commodity." "Especially when it belongs to an elderly woman with considerable wealth," Tuppence said pointedly. The doctor smiled faintly. "You are shrewd, Mrs. Beresford, but you must not imagine malice where there is only nature. Lady Isabel is declining. One needn't hasten what time already demands." Tommy regarded him steadily. "Still, her death would be convenient for certain heirs." Partridge's geniality did not falter, though his eyes gleamed coldly. "Convenience is a dangerous word, Mr. Beresford. Many things are convenient. Few are acted upon." He turned the conversation toward Lady Isabel's fragility, describing her symptoms with a physician's calm detachment. Yet beneath his polished words, Tuppence heard the echo of a warning. When he departed, she muttered, "That man is too smooth. I'd sooner trust a snake in a basket." Tommy nodded thoughtfully. "And yet snakes are useful. They reveal what others fear. We must watch him closely." The day dragged on under a cloak of tension. At luncheon, Reginald was affable to the point of mockery, teasing Eliza until she nearly fled the table. Clara avoided everyone's eyes. Lady Isabel, sharp even in frailty, observed all with disquieting silence. Tuppence scribbled notes in her book, whispering to Tommy when no one could hear. Each of them has something to gain. Reginald, money to pay his debts. Partridge, power through influence. Clara, perhaps fear for her position. Eliza, protection of her mistress. And Lady Isabel, what does she hide? Why does she not confront them directly? Tommy's gaze drifted toward the high windows where clouds gathered once more. "Because, my dear, the most dangerous players often remain silent until the end." That evening, as shadows lengthened across the halls, Eliza knocked softly at their chamber door. "I cannot bear it," she whispered. "They all look at me as though I were guilty. Please, you must believe I told the truth." Tuppence drew her in kindly. "We do, Eliza, but you must steady yourself. If you appear too nervous, you'll invite suspicion." Tommy studied the girl. "Tell me plainly, Why risk so much for Lady Isabel? Why not leave this house behind?" Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "Because she was kind to me when no one else was. She gave me employment, shelter, dignity. I cannot abandon her to vultures." Tuppence squeezed her hand. "Then we shall help you. But you must trust us to see clearly, even when appearances turn against you." Eliza nodded, though fear still clouded her gaze. Night settled once more over Ravenhurst, the house creaking in its ancient bones. In the silence, Tommy's thoughts returned again to the charred scrap in the grate, to Clara's frightened admission, to Dr. Partridge's veiled hints. The will had disappeared, but in its absence motives had grown sharper, like knives drawn from their sheaths. In the distance a clock chimed the hour. Somewhere within the manor a door closed softly. Footsteps echoed, then ceased, and in the guest chamber Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a glance that spoke what neither said aloud. The game was deepening, and every player at Ravenhurst stood to win, or lose, everything. Night returned to Ravenhurst like a shroud. The mist thickened across the lawns, softening edges of hedgerows and trees, until the grounds seemed half dream, half nightmare. The great house loomed behind its veil of fog, its windows dim save for a few glimmers of candlelight that trembled in the damp air. Within its walls silence reigned, the deceptive kind of silence that makes one strain for the faintest sound. Tommy Beresford had no intention of sleeping. He had spent the evening quietly marking movements, listening to conversations, and noting who retired when. Now, clad in his overcoat, he slipped from the guest chamber with the noiseless step of a man who had learned long ago how to keep out of sight. Tuppence had protested, of course. "Really, Tommy, wandering about misty grounds at midnight is practically an invitation to be brained by a lurking villain." "Exactly why I must go," he had answered, adjusting his collar. "One can't very well catch villains by sitting in armchairs." "Plenty of good detectives do," she retorted archly. "Poirot rarely leaves his armchair." "True, but Wolfe has orchids. I have mist. A poor substitute, but it will do." And with that, he had pressed her hand and departed, leaving Tuppence with strict instructions to keep watch over Lady Isabel should anything untoward occur indoors. The grounds of Ravenhurst were vast, but Tommy moved with steady purpose. The air was heavy with moisture. Each breath felt like inhaling damp cloth. Gravel crunched faintly beneath his shoes as he followed a path that wound past yew hedges and half-wild rose bushes. From time to time he paused, listening. Somewhere an owl hooted. The distant creak of a branch echoed like a footstep. Then he saw it, a pale glow moving across the mist. Not the steady gleam of an electric torch, but the wavering flicker of a lantern. It bobbed and dipped, casting strange shadows as it advanced toward the far end of the grounds, toward the family mausoleum, a low stone building partly concealed by ivy. Tommy crouched, his heart quickening. He followed at a distance, keeping to the darker edges where fog cloaked him. As he drew nearer, he saw that the lantern was borne by a cloaked figure, and another shadow moved beside it. Two people, not one. Their voices were too faint to catch clearly, but the murmur of low speech drifted back. Near the mausoleum they halted. One figure extended an arm passing something, papers perhaps, or a packet of letters. The other received it with haste. Tommy leaned closer, careful not to disturb the gravel. His foot brushed against a loose stone and it shifted with a betraying crunch. Instantly, one figure spun about, lantern flaring. For the briefest instant Tommy glimpsed the pale flash of a face, then the light swung wildly, and one of the shadows bolted into the fog. "Stop!" Tommy cried, charging forward, but the mist swallowed the fleeing form. Footsteps pounded, then faded into silence. He pressed on, turning the corner of the mausoleum, and nearly collided headlong into Eliza Harwood. She gasped, clutching her shawl tight around her shoulders. "Mr. Beresford, you frightened me." "You?" Tommy demanded, breath quickened. "What are you doing skulking about at this hour?" I saw the light too," she stammered. "I thought if I followed I might discover who has been haunting the grounds. But then someone ran past me and, oh, I swear it was not me you saw with the lantern." Her eyes were wide, desperate. For a moment Tommy doubted her. Her sudden presence here was too convenient. Yet he also read genuine fear in her trembling. "Very well," he said grimly, but whoever the second person was, they've slipped us. Come, back to the house before we both lose ourselves in this cursed mist. They re-entered Ravenhurst through a side door, the corridors hushed and chill. Tommy's mind snagged on the neat twine he'd glimpsed in the fog. Solicitors marked packets like that. Originals slept in safes, but duplicates lived off-site, quiet, stubborn things that fire could not touch. As they moved toward the main hall, a cry broke the silence, a woman's cry, sharp and fearful. Tommy dashed up the staircase 2 steps at a time, Eliza close behind. At the end of the corridor, Tuppence stood outside Lady Isabel's chamber, her face pale. "Tommy, quickly, she's collapsed!" They rushed inside. Lady Isabel lay slumped in her chair, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. On the table beside her rested a half-finished glass of cordial. Her skin was ashen, her breath shallow. Tuppence bent swiftly, fingers at her throat. "She lives, just, but her pulse is faint. Tommy, her drink. It smells wrong." He lifted the glass, sniffing. Beneath the sweetness lingered a bitter trace unmistakable to anyone with wartime experience. "Tampered with," he said. "And recently?" Eliza gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "Help me, Tuppence," Tommy urged. Together they eased Lady Isabel onto the bed. Tuppence fetched water, coaxing the frail woman to sip, while Tommy propped her upright. Slowly, colour began to return to her cheeks, and she stirred with a faint groan. "She will live," Tuppence said with relief, "but another hour, another glass might have ended her." Tommy's eyes hardened. So the game has moved from threats to attempted murder. By the time Lady Isabel regained full consciousness, the household was in an uproar. Reginald stormed into the room demanding explanations, his eyes flashing. Dr. Partridge arrived moments later, full of professional outrage at being summoned from his bed. Clara hovered anxiously in the doorway, wringing her hands. "She must not be disturbed," Partridge protested, fussing at her pulse. "The shock could kill her." But Lady Isabel's eyes opened wide, sharp with determination. Her lips moved faintly and Tuppence bent close. "What is it, Lady Isabel?" Her voice was a whisper, barely audible. "The will. It must not fall into the wrong hands." Then her eyes closed again, and exhaustion carried her back into sleep. The room fell silent. Each face reflected a different emotion. Reginald's barely concealed impatience, Clara's nervous dread, Partridge's polished concern, Eliza's anguish. Tommy broke the silence. "The question now is, who tampered with her drink?" Suspicion fell like a stone in the room. "It was not I," Clara blurted, trembling. "I brought her tray earlier, but it was untouched when I left." Dr. Partridge's voice was smooth. "Nor I. I insist her health be guarded, not endangered." Reginald spread his hands with mock innocence. "Do you accuse me, Mr. Beresford? My aunt's death may profit me, but to attempt murder under my own roof would be folly indeed." Tommy regarded them each in turn. "Folks who profit rarely consider folly, but proof we have none, yet." Later, when the household had dispersed, Tommy walked the corridor with Tuppence at his side. A faint dampness stained the carpet near Lady Isabel's door. He crouched, examining it in the lamplight. "Mud," he murmured. "Fresh mud." "There again," Tuppence exclaimed. "More footprints?" "Yes. Someone came in from the grounds before Lady Isabel collapsed. And not just one. Look, 2 different patterns. One larger, one smaller, both leading to this corridor." Tuppence's brow furrowed. "Then at least 2 people prowled outside tonight. One returned and entered her chamber, or near enough to tamper with her drink." "And one slipped away into the mist," Tommy said softly. They followed the prints as far as the main hall before the trail grew faint. Tommy straightened, his expression grim. 2 figures at the mausoleum, 2 sets of footprints here, and a glass of cordial turned poison. The pieces are gathering, Tuppence, but they refuse to fit. "Which means," she said quietly, "someone is arranging them to look like a puzzle of their own choosing." Tommy nodded. "And the sooner we discover whose hand arranges them, the safer Lady Isabel will be." When at last they returned to their guest chamber, the house seemed to press around them, each creak and sigh of the old timbers heavy with menace. Tuppence drew the curtains against the mist, but the unease lingered. "She was right, Tommy," she said softly, recalling Lady Isabel's whispered words. "The will must not fall into the wrong hands. But whose hands can we trust at all? Tommy extinguished the lamp, his profile dark against the window. That, my dear, is the question Ravenhurst itself intends to answer, but it will not answer gently. Outside, the mist thickened again, and the lantern light that had danced upon the grounds earlier was gone, swallowed into the fog as though it had never been. Yet Tommy knew, with the certainty of instinct, that the game was only beginning to bare its teeth. The storm broke again the following evening, as though the heavens themselves had resolved to echo the discord within Ravenhurst. Rain lashed against the mullioned windows, and the wind moaned through the chimneys like a chorus of restless spirits. Inside, the house's atmosphere was taut, every corridor holding whispers, every room a stage for suspicion. Tuppence Beresford, never one to be cowed by weather or mood, decided that the moment had come to act. "Tommy," she announced after supper, as the household drifted into uneasy silence. "I intend to ask questions. People rarely volunteer their secrets, but I've found they slip out when confronted by a woman who refuses to be ignored." Tommy smiled faintly. "Which is your special talent, my dear? Ask away, but mind that you leave them some room to hang themselves. A good noose should always be of their own making." And so Tuppence set about her task. She began with Clara, whom she found polishing silver in the butler's pantry. The maid jumped at Tuppence's entrance, nearly dropping a spoon. "My dear Clara," Tuppence said kindly, "you're overworked and underappreciated. Sit down for a moment and have a word with me. I shan't tell anyone." Clara obeyed, wringing her hands in her lap. "Tell me," Tuppence continued softly, "is there a reason you seem so frightened? It isn't just Sir Reginald's temper, is it?" The girl hesitated, eyes darting to the door. "I shouldn't say, but you must. Think of Lady Isabel, so frail, so trusting. Don't you want her safe?" At that, Clara's composure cracked. "My brother," she whispered. "He was footman here, dismissed last month for stealing. But he swore to me he never took anything. Sir Reginald said he had, and Lady Isabel, she believed him. Now my brother's gone and he's desperate. I fear he's fallen in with bad company." Tuppence leaned closer. "Bad company who might use you to reach the family. Blackmail, perhaps?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I daren't deny it. They said if I spoke, my brother would be ruined entirely, so I kept silent." "There now," Tuppence murmured, patting her hand. "You've done the right thing at last. Secrets are dangerous things, Clara, and they burn worse than fire when hidden." Her next visit was to Dr. Partridge, who sat in the study with medical journals spread before him. He looked up with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Mrs. Beresford, what an unexpected pleasure. Do sit." "I prefer to stand," Tuppence replied crisply. "I want the truth from you, Doctor. You advised Lady Isabel to alter her will, did you not?" Partridge's smile faltered. "Ah, word travels fast in this house." "It does when I make it," Tuppence retorted. "Answer me." The physician sighed, folding his hands. "Very well. Yes, I once suggested that Lady Isabel make changes. Her nephew is unreliable, shall we say. I urged her to consider charitable bequests. She listened politely, then dismissed my advice. Since then, I have had no part in her decisions." "But you benefit from her favour," Tuppence pressed. "A trusted adviser, always near her side. Convenient for any man with ambitions." He gave a short laugh. "If I sought fortune, Mrs. Beresford, I'd have married years ago into wealth. I chose instead the dull respectability of medicine." "Respectability," she murmured, "a word that often hides what should not be seen." Sir Reginald was less accommodating. Tuppence found him in the billiard-room, striking balls with unnecessary force. His dark brows lowered as she entered. "You again. Do you make it your mission to interfere in every corner of this house?" "Only where murder and fraud are concerned," Tuppence answered sweetly. "Tell me, Sir Reginald, what business had you in the library at midnight?" His cue struck the ball with a crack. "Lies," he snapped. "Servants' gossip, nothing more. I was not in the library." "And yet Clara saw you." "Clara would say anything to save her miserable place. Why should I prowl about like a thief in my own house? What need have I of secret panels and hidden wills? My aunt is not dead yet." "No," Tuppence said quietly, "but someone tried to hasten her death." His eyes blazed. Do you accuse me? I ask questions. Innocent men rarely fear them. Reginald turned away, muttering. He offered no further explanation, and his silence was more damning than words. Eliza was last. Tuppence found her pacing her small chamber, her hands twisting nervously. You doubt me, Eliza said at once before Tuppence could speak. I see it in your eyes. You think I'm hiding something. Aren't you? Tuppence asked gently. The girl flushed. I have only ever tried to protect Lady Isabel. She is all I have in this world. If I hold back, it is only to shield her. Surely you can understand that. I can, Tuppence admitted, but secrecy breeds mistrust. If you wish me to believe in you, Eliza, you must believe in me. Eliza's lips trembled, but she said nothing more. Tuppence left her with a sigh. Even compassion could not pierce every wall. Meanwhile, Tommy pursued a quieter line of inquiry. In the library, among stacks of dusty papers, he discovered something that made him pause. A folder of family legal documents, tied with ribbon. Leafing through, he noted where a letter had been torn away, leaving only the faint impression of the raven crest on adjacent sheets. So Eliza had not lied about her envelope. It had indeed once belonged to the Ravenhurst legal packet. Tommy tapped his spectacles thoughtfully. She knew more than chance would allow. Whatever else she conceals, she had genuine knowledge, and that means she is dangerous, to herself or to another. By nightfall, the storm raged full upon the house, battering the shutters and howling through the chimney flues. Thunder rolled like drums of war, and lightning flared, illuminating strained faces around the dinner table. Conversations faltered, but when they resumed, they carried sharp edges. Reginald spoke of debts with forced laughter. Dr. Partridge steered the talk toward health and mortality, too pointedly for comfort. Clara served in silence, her eyes red from weeping. Eliza barely touched her food. Lady Isabel presided with the dignity of a queen, yet her hand trembled upon her glass. Hidden alliances began to glimmer through the cracks. A glance exchanged between Clara and Eliza suggested sympathy, perhaps collusion. Reginald's sneer at the doctor hinted at private animosity. The doctor's calm regard of Lady Isabel bore something more than professional concern. Tuppence leaned close to Tommy. Do you see it? Threads, all tangled, everyone tied to everyone else, and each knot conceals a motive. He nodded slowly. Yes, debts, resentments, dismissed servants, whispers of lovers too. Did you note how Clara blushed when Partridge addressed her? Then she is more entangled than she admits. And Reginald, his fury hides desperation. A man drowning in debt will clutch any straw, even a poisoned one. Tuppence's gaze swept the table. Then no one is innocent. Or everyone is guilty, Tommy murmured. Later, as the household dispersed, thunder shaking the windows, Tuppence stood alone in the hall, watching shadows leap across the walls. She felt the weight of the storm pressing close, echoing the turmoil in the house. Secrets had been dragged half into light, but each revelation spawned more questions. Clara's brother, was he a pawn or a player? Partridge's advice, selfless or sinister? Reginald's fury, genuine denial or desperate lie? Eliza's silence, protection or concealment? And Lady Isabel, what knowledge lay behind those sharp, weary eyes? The house moaned as wind forced its way through unseen cracks. Tuppence shivered, not from cold, but from the sense that Ravenhurst itself was alive, its stones heavy with secrets, its timbers creaking beneath the burden of lies. In her mind, the words of Lady Isabel whispered again, the will must not fall into the wrong hands. And as lightning flared once more, Tuppence knew the storm outside was nothing compared with the storm gathering within the house. The storm had not abated. Rain lashed the stone walls of Ravenhurst Manor as though determined to scour secrets from its ancient mortar, and wind clawed at the shutters with restless hands. The house itself seemed to shiver under the onslaught, every creak and groan echoing through the draughty corridors. Tommy Beresford lay awake, his mind refusing rest. The revelations of the day swirled in his thoughts. Clara's fearful confession, Partridge's evasions, Reginald's temper, Eliza's nervous half-truths. The household was a nest of shadows, each figure moving in secrecy, every word edged with menace. Sleep was impossible. It was near midnight when the sound came. 3 knocks, loud, deliberate, reverberating through the house. They echoed down staircases, through chambers, and into the marrow of those who heard them. Tuppence sat up instantly. "Tommy, did you hear?" "I did." He was already pulling on his dressing gown. "Stay here." "As if I would," she retorted, following him briskly. The knocks came again, slower this time, like the toll of a bell. Doors opened along the corridor. Clara emerged, pale and trembling, clutching a shawl. Eliza, eyes wide, joined them, her lips forming a silent prayer. Even Reginald appeared, irritated but unsettled. Together they descended to the great hall, where the heavy front doors loomed like a fortress. Another knock, closer now, as though the very wood shuddered beneath the fist. Reginald strode forward with forced bravado. "This is my house. I'll answer it." Tommy placed a hand on his arm. "Allow me. Whoever knocks at Ravenhurst at this hour does not come with goodwill." He opened the door cautiously. On the threshold stood a messenger boy, soaked through, cap pulled low. He thrust out a gloved hand holding a black-sealed envelope, then fled into the storm without a word. His footsteps vanished in the downpour before anyone could summon a question. Tommy closed the door against the wind and turned the envelope over in his hand. Black wax glistened, unbroken, stamped with no crest, only a crude impression. The household gathered round as he cracked the seal and unfolded the single sheet within. In bold, uneven letters the message read, "The rightful heir will not wait." A hush fell over the hall. Only the storm dared speak, rattling the windows like an angry spirit. Lady Isabel, carried in by Dr. Partridge after the commotion woke her, stared at the letter with wide, frightened eyes. "The heir," she whispered. "It is beginning. My time is nearly done." "Don't say that," Tuppence urged, steadying her hand. "It's only a threat meant to unnerve you." Reginald laughed harshly. "A crude hoax. Someone wants to play at melodrama." "Perhaps," Tommy said slowly, "but crude hoaxes often mask clever minds." He studied the handwriting. It is disguised, too heavily. No natural hand shapes its letters so stiffly, and yet, in disguise, something leaks through. He pointed to a smear at the edge of the page. Ink, carelessly smudged. Tuppence's eyes narrowed. Smudges, like those on Clara's apron this morning. Ink stains that no amount of scrubbing would remove. All eyes turned to Clara, who gasped and shook her head violently. "No, I swear I didn't write it. I only copied something as I was told. They made me." "Who?" Tuppence pressed. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "A man came last night, through the kitchen door. He gave me the words, told me to copy them onto paper. He said if I refused, my brother would suffer. I had no choice." Her sobs filled the hall. Dr. Partridge's voice was smooth but sharp. "Convenient, is it not? The maid blames a nameless man who slips away unseen. How very tidy." "I'm telling the truth," Clara wailed. Eliza stepped forward, placing an arm around her. "She wouldn't lie, not about this. She's too frightened." Tommy folded the letter carefully. Frightened or not, someone wanted this written by a trembling hand. The disguise is deliberate. The question is, was Clara used as pawn, or does she play a deeper game? Reginald snorted. "A maid with schemes, absurd. The culprit is plain. It is Eliza. She arrived with fragments of wills, tales of conspiracies, and now more threats. She poisons our house with fear." Eliza's face blanched. "No, I would never." Tuppence's voice cut through. "Enough. Blame flung in the dark helps no one. What matters is that someone orchestrates this with care. Someone who knows the house, the family, the weaknesses, and someone who thrives as we quarrel amongst ourselves." Lightning split the sky, flooding the hall with white glare. Thunder followed like a cannon. In that moment, each face looked etched in stark relief. Reginald's sneer, Partridge's polished mask, Clara's tear-streaked fear, Eliza's desperate innocence, Lady Isabel's haunted eyes. Tommy folded the paper again, sliding it into his pocket. "We are being played against one another, and until we know who arranges the board, none of us are safe." The household dispersed reluctantly, but the letter's shadow lingered. In the drawing room, Tuppence turned the matter over with Tommy. "It's clever," she said, pacing before the fire. "Force Clara to write it. Let her guilt spill into the open. Distract us all while the true hand watches." "Exactly," Tommy agreed. "It deepens division. Suspicion spreads like fire. Each of them benefits from Lady Isabel's fear. Reginald through inheritance, Partridge through influence, even Eliza through her role as protector. Clara is caught between loyalty and coercion. Which of them took advantage of that fear to move the pieces?" Tuppence tapped her chin. The ink smudge was too obvious, almost an invitation to notice, which makes me think Clara tells the truth. Someone wanted us to find her guilty, quickly. "Agreed," Tommy said, "which means we look not at her trembling, but at who profits from her disgrace." They sat in silence, the fire crackling. Rain beat harder on the windows, as though determined to hammer the truth into their skulls. Meanwhile, upstairs, Lady Isabel lay awake, her thin hands clutching her rosary. Each rumble of thunder drew her thoughts darker. She had seen families devour themselves over less than land and title. Now, as her body weakened, she feared the vultures circling would strike before her last breath. She whispered again, to no one but the storm, the will must be safe." The night dragged on, tense and sleepless. Each member of the household lay in separate rooms, listening for footsteps, for whispers, for the next knock that might sound. But none came. When morning arrived, grey and reluctant, the house felt older still, as though the storm had stolen years from its stones. But the dread of the second knock remained, echoing in memory long after the messenger had vanished into the storm. At breakfast, conversation was strained. Reginald mocked Clara openly, calling her a forger. Dr. Partridge chided him, too smooth by half. Eliza sat pale and silent. Clara's hands shook so badly she spilled tea. Lady Isabel, frail yet watchful, looked from face to face with the eyes of a judge. Tommy and Tuppence exchanged glances. They knew what no one else admitted. Ravenhurst was no longer merely a house with secrets. It had become a trap, and the next move, whoever made it, would tighten the snare. And outside, as if to confirm it, lightning split the sky once more. The storm had reached its crescendo. Wind battered the shutters. Rain poured in sheets down the leaded windows, and the old timbers of Ravenhurst groaned as though the house itself resisted the tempest. Midnight's dreadful knock had left the household frayed, nerves worn thin, and suspicion fermenting like poison. Yet no one, not even Tommy, expected the storm within the walls to break with such violence. It began with a cry, sharp, guttural, cutting through the manor like a knife. The sound rose from the grand hall and echoed along the corridors. Doors opened, footsteps rushed, voices called in confusion. When Tommy and Tuppence reached the staircase, they found a tableau so shocking it froze the breath in their lungs. Sir Reginald lay sprawled across the marble tiles at the foot of the stairs. His head was twisted at an unnatural angle, his shirt front stained crimson. One hand clutched at the banister, the other gripped a scrap of paper so tightly that his knuckles gleamed white even in death. Clara shrieked, dropping the candle she carried, the wax splattering like tears across the floor. Eliza cried out in horror, pressing her hands to her mouth. Lady Isabel, descending slowly with Dr. Partridge's assistance, took one look and collapsed in a faint. For an instant chaos reigned, shouts, sobs, confusion. "Silence!" Tommy's voice cut through like a command in battle. He stepped forward, calm but grim, and knelt beside the body. "No one touch him, no one move until I've seen." The hall fell into an uneasy hush, broken only by the storm beyond the walls. Tommy's examination was swift but thorough. He noted the gash on Reginald's temple, deep and bloody. A heavy blow, perhaps from the marble stair or from some blunt weapon. The position of the body, too neatly sprawled as though arranged, and the scrap of paper clutched in his hand. He pried it loose with care. The letters were jagged, torn across the middle, but enough remained to suggest accusation, Eliza. Gasps rippled through the gathered household. All eyes swung to the girl, who recoiled as though struck. "No!" she cried. "It isn't true! I never—" Dr. Partridge raised his voice above hers, sharp and insistent. "The evidence speaks plainly. He died holding her name. Who else but Eliza, the intruder in this house, the cause of all our misfortunes?" "Convenient, isn't it?" Tuppence snapped, her eyes flashing. She swept to Eliza's side and drew her protectively close. A note naming her, found in a dead man's hand. Too convenient by half. Forgive me if I don't swallow the bait." "You defend her because you are bewitched by her sob stories," Partridge retorted. "But facts—" "Facts," Tommy interrupted coolly, rising to his feet. "Facts are blood spatter, Doctor, and this tells me more than a scrap of paper. Look, Reginald lies here, head wound bleeding, yet there is no trail upon the stairs, no splashes upon the banister. The blow did not come from a fall. He was struck elsewhere, and placed here." Clara whimpered. "Placed? Then the killer moved him?" "Yes," Tommy said firmly, "and placed that scrap in his hand for us to find." "But who would—" "Anyone with cause to shift suspicion," Tuppence interjected, "which, in this house, is nearly everyone." Dr. Partridge bent again over the body, adjusting his spectacles. "You speak boldly, Mr. Beresford, but you overlook something simple. If he were struck elsewhere, why bring him here to the hall? Why not leave him where he fell?" "To stage a scene," Tommy answered. "To ensure the discovery would be dramatic, public, to ensure panic." At that moment, Lady Isabel stirred in Partridge's arms, her eyelids fluttering. Her frail voice broke the silence. "Reginald, gone? Oh, merciful heavens, my nephew!" She sagged again, overcome. Eliza knelt beside her mistress, whispering comfort, tears streaking her face. "I had nothing to do with it, my lady, I swear." Partridge's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps, but if innocence is so easily sworn, guilt is easily hidden." Tommy straightened, surveying the hall. "Enough. We must secure the scene. Clara, fetch more candles and see that no one enters or leaves this room until I give word. Mrs. Beresford, remain with Lady Isabel and Miss Harwood. Doctor, if you would kindly keep your medical eye on the deceased, but refrain from rearranging him." Partridge bristled but obeyed. As the household settled into uneasy silence, Tommy walked slowly around the body. His gaze lingered on the blood, noting the angle, the way it pooled more heavily on one side. He studied the stair, the banister, the tiles. Then his eyes lifted to the portraits along the wall, ancestors gazing down with judgment. He spoke at last. "This is no accident. Sir Reginald was struck deliberately, and the staging meant to mislead. We face not conspiracy now, but murder, cold, calculated murder." The hours that followed stretched heavy with dread. The body was removed at last to a side chamber, covered respectfully. Lady Isabel, weak and trembling, retired under Tuppence's care. Clara wept in corners. Eliza remained pale and stricken, yet suspicion poisoned every glance. In the library, as lightning flashed across the shelves, Tommy and Tuppence conferred. "It points to her," Tommy admitted quietly. "The note, the timing, even her presence in every scene." "But you don't believe it," Tuppence said firmly. He shook his head. "No, it's too clumsy. Eliza may be secretive, but murder staged in such a manner smacks of desperation. Someone wants her to hang." "Then the killer grows reckless," Tuppence murmured, "which makes them more dangerous." They sat in silence, the storm raging about them, the knowledge sinking deep. Ravenhurst's shadow had turned deadly, and the enemy moved still among them. Later, when all seemed finally quiet, Tommy made one more inspection of the hall. He crouched where the body had lain, brushing the marble tiles with careful fingers. There, faint but visible, was a smear of mud. Not from Reginald, whose shoes had been polished, spotless. No, this mud matched the prints he had seen the night before, near Lady Isabel's door. He rose slowly, his jaw set. The killer was clever, but not clever enough to erase every trace. And somewhere in the sleeping manor, as wind howled through the chimneys, that clever killer waited, desperate, hunted, and willing to strike again. The storm had not left Ravenhurst. It hung above the manor like a living thing, growling, flashing, threatening. Within, the household had been reduced to taut silence after Reginald's death. Doors shut quickly, voices dropped, and suspicion gnawed at every corner. But Tommy Beresford had no intention of letting the house remain in fear's grip. He had spent the night turning over each fragment, each shadow of evidence, until a plan had formed. Now, with dawn's pale light fighting through the windows, he turned to his wife. "Tuppence," he said, adjusting his tie with deliberate calm, "it's time for the curtain to rise. We shall have our drawing-room scene, and the villain will step neatly into it." Tuppence arched an eyebrow. A trap, then? A very simple one. I shall tell them the will has been found untouched. Fear of discovery will unmask the guilty more surely than accusation. And if you're wrong? Then, my dear, Tommy replied with a smile, we improvise, but I don't believe I am wrong. By mid-morning, the drawing-room was assembled as though for some grim performance. At first light, Tommy had wired Lady Isabel's solicitors. Back came the reply. A duplicate of the will was lodged off-site and could be produced on request. Heavy drapes shut out the watery light. A fire burned, though it gave no warmth to the atmosphere. Lady Isabel sat in her great chair, pale but resolute, attended by Eliza. Clara stood near the wall, her eyes darting nervously. Dr. Partridge lounged by the hearth with studied composure, while Reginald's absence loomed like a ghost among them. Tommy stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering. I have an announcement. The disputed will of Lady Isabel Ravenhurst, long thought missing or destroyed, has been recovered intact. A ripple moved through the room like wind through grass. Eliza gasped, clutching Lady Isabel's hand. Clara crossed herself. Lady Isabel stiffened, her eyes widening. Partridge alone gave a smooth smile. Indeed, how fortunate, and how miraculous, after all our efforts proved vain. Tommy ignored him. Its contents, I assure you, will be placed before the proper authorities, which means that whoever sought to suppress it, by theft, by fire, or by murder, has failed. The silence that followed was electric. The storm outside punctuated it with a roll of thunder. Tuppence, standing at her husband's side, let her gaze travel across the faces. She saw fear in Clara, defiance in Partridge, torment in Eliza, weary relief in Lady Isabel. Each carried secrets, and secrets under pressure had a way of spilling. The first to speak was Clara. Her voice trembled. I must confess something. I did steal. Small things, trinkets, coins. I thought no one would notice. Reginald did notice. He dismissed my brother, said he would accuse me too. I was terrified, but I never wished him dead. Lady Isabel's eyes softened. Child, you should have come to me. I was afraid, Clara whispered. He had such power. Tommy inclined his head gravely. Your honesty now may save you, Clara, but theft is not murder. Next, Partridge cleared his throat. Since we are spilling confessions, I shall offer mine. I am not so solvent as I appear. I am, in fact, in debt, serious debt. My profession covers less than society assumes, and I lived beyond my means. I sought Lady Isabel's favour, even urged her toward charitable wills, in hopes of eventual benefit. That is all. My motives were selfish, yes, but not murderous. His smooth tone filled the room, but Tommy marked the flicker of unease in his eyes. Then Eliza rose, wringing her hands. I too have concealed something. My past. I was not merely a companion before coming here. I served in another household, one where scandal touched the master. I fled, ashamed though I was innocent. I hid it for fear you would not trust me. But I swear, I came here only to serve Lady Isabel faithfully. Tuppence's voice was gentle. Thank you, Eliza, but concealment of a past is not murder either. At last, all eyes turned to Lady Isabel. She raised her thin hand. My secret is simple. I did change my will, not as Reginald wished, not as Partridge suggested. I chose to leave much to charity, some to Eliza, some to servants who had been loyal. Reginald knew, and he despised me for it. Yet murder was not in my thoughts, only protection, and now he is gone. Her words trembled into silence. Tommy stepped forward, the trap tightening. You see, each of you held something back, yet none confessed to Reginald's murder. Still, there was a murderer among us, and I believe I know who. The room drew taut. Consider first the staging, Tommy continued. Reginald's body was placed in the hall too neatly with a note in his hand. That note was not written by him. It was torn and planted. And whose profession better suits such careful staging than a doctor accustomed to arranging appearances? Partridge's smile faltered. A serious accusation, sir. Consider also the attempt upon Lady Isabel's life. Poison, subtle, slipped into her drink. A physician has access to such things, the knowledge to dose without trace. Circumstantial, Partridge protested. Finally, Tuppence interjected, her eyes gleaming. The footprints. From the very first night, muddy prints in the corridor outside Lady Isabel's chamber. 2 sets, yes, but one distinctive. Boots with a hobnail sole, half worn, leaving a crooked impression. We searched quietly this morning. Only one person in this house owns such boots, Dr. Partridge. A murmur ran through the room. Clara gasped. Eliza clutched Lady Isabel's hand. Partridge's composure cracked. Lies. You cannot prove— Tommy cut him short. We can. And more. Your debts. Reginald mocked you for them, didn't he? He threatened to expose you, to see you ruined. And the will, if Lady Isabel's true will were read, your influence would vanish. So you schemed, drug Lady Isabel, burn the will, frame Eliza, silence Reginald. Each step failed because you underestimated persistence, and because you underestimated us. You even coerced Clara to copy a threat by sending your village runner through the kitchen door, the same hand that carried your messages at midnight. I had you watched from Paddington by a boy in a dark coat, Partridge snarled. I needed to know whether you'd bring the paper here. The doctor's face darkened, rage breaking through polish. You meddling amateurs, you think you've won. You know nothing of what I endured, mocked by Reginald, dismissed by Isabel, drowning in debt while serving their comforts. I deserved more than scraps of gratitude. His outburst was his undoing. Clara shrank back. Eliza gasped. Lady Isabel covered her face. Tommy's voice was iron. Deserving more does not excuse murder, Doctor. Your game is finished. The storm outside seemed to pause, as though listening. Then thunder crashed again, and footsteps rang down the corridor. Scotland Yard's man, Tommy's contact, discreetly summoned that morning, entered with constables. Dr. Partridge, Tommy said, you are under arrest for the murder of Sir Reginald Ravenhurst and the attempted murder of Lady Isabel. Partridge struggled, but the constables seized him. His protests rang hollow, his mask finally broken. As he was led away, Tuppence exhaled softly. There it is, Tommy. Curtain down. He slipped his arm around her. Yes, though the play leaves its shadows, a house like Ravenhurst never quite sheds them. Lady Isabel raised her head, her voice trembling yet resolute. You have saved my life, Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, and though my family is broken, truth at least remains. Eliza knelt by her mistress, tears falling freely. Clara, relieved, crossed herself again. The storm outside began at last to ease. The thunder drifted further off, the rain softened, and pale light touched the windows. Tuppence looked out across the lawns, mist rising like ghosts of secrets past. Strange, isn't it, Tommy? In the end, it was not the raven crest, nor the missing papers, but footprints in the mud that betrayed him. Footprints and folly, Tommy replied. A villain may be clever, but desperation always leaves its mark. They stood together in the fading storm, the case at last complete, knowing that Ravenhurst's darkness would linger in memory but no longer in threat. The storm had passed. Ravenhurst, which for days had shuddered under thunder and menace, now lay quiet beneath a washed sky. Pale sunlight streamed across the sodden lawns, glinting on wet stone, gilding ivy and gables. The manor itself, for all its shadows and secrets, seemed to exhale relief. Inside, the household was subdued but calmer. The arrest of Dr. Partridge had left silence in its wake, a silence of grief, of exhaustion, but also of release. Evil, once unmasked, loses much of its power. Lady Isabel sat in the drawing-room, wrapped in shawls, her frail frame still bearing the tremor of recent days. Yet her eyes were clear, steady once more. At her side stood Eliza Harwood, no longer the frightened fugitive who had knocked at a stranger's door, but a woman vindicated. Clara hovered nearby, chastened but comforted by forgiveness that she had not dared to expect. Tommy and Tuppence, standing together by the hearth, waited as Lady Isabel spoke. "My friends," she said, her voice thin but resolute, "words fail me. You have saved not only my life but the dignity of this family. Though Reginald is lost, though the name of one long trusted is blackened, truth has prevailed. For that I am grateful beyond measure." Tuppence inclined her head. Tuppence inclined her. "We only nudged open the shutters, Lady Isabel. The truth was always there, It merely needed light. Lady Isabel's lips curved faintly. And light you brought, even amidst storm. She turned her gaze to Eliza. My dear, you too must forgive yourself. Your fears made you cautious, but your loyalty never wavered. I should have trusted your warnings sooner. Tears welled in Eliza's eyes. I only wished to protect you, my lady, but I see now that secrecy, even meant kindly, can make shadows deeper. And you, Lady Isabel added, looking toward Clara. You erred, yes, but you are young, and fear is a harsh master. Let this be lesson enough. Your brother shall be restored his good name. Clara sank into a curtsy, voice breaking. Thank you, my lady. I will serve you faithfully from this day. Thus the circle of confession closed, not in bitterness, but in weary compassion. Later that afternoon, papers were set in order. The solicitor's lodged duplicate of the will was read by a solicitor summoned in haste. Its provisions were clear. Charitable foundations stood to gain. Servants were remembered, and Eliza was granted both protection and provision. Reginald, as Lady Isabel had admitted, had been left but a portion, a cause for his bitterness, perhaps, but no justification for murder. The reading brought a kind of solemn peace. Justice, long threatened, was now assured. Ravenhurst's legacy would not be one of lies and knives in the dark, but of truth restored. For Tommy and Tuppence the matter was complete. Their bags were packed, their coats fetched. They stood at the grand doors as Lady Isabel bid them farewell. You will always be welcome at Ravenhurst, she said softly, though I hope never again under such dreadful circumstances. Tommy bowed. We hope so too, Lady Isabel. Mysteries are best left to novels. Real life tends to make them untidy. Tuppence smiled. But sometimes it is untidiness that shows what matters most. Loyalty, courage, and occasionally a very muddy footprint. Eliza stepped forward. I shall never forget what you have done for me. When I thought all the world against me, you believed. Belief, Tuppence said warmly, is often the first step toward proof. They exchanged farewells, then turned to the waiting motor car. As the vehicle carried them down the long drive, the manor receded into distance, its spires softened by mist, its secrets left behind at last. London embraced them with its familiar hum, buses rumbling, lamplighters at their posts, the scent of coal smoke curling above rooftops. By evening, they were once more in their modest sitting room, fire glowing, clock ticking steadily toward comfort. Tommy sank into his chair with a sigh of satisfaction, stretching his legs. Home, sweet home. No draughty corridors, no poisoned drinks, no thunderous knocks at midnight. Tuppence, already busying herself with the tea tray, cast him a mischievous glance. You must admit, Tommy, life would be frightfully dull without a little intrigue now and then. Dullness, he declared, is vastly underrated. She handed him a cup, settling opposite with her own. Do you suppose Lady Isabel will find peace now? Tommy considered. She will. Truth brings peace, even when painful. As for Eliza, she'll grow into her courage. Clara will learn honesty, and Ravenhurst will stand as it always has, brooding perhaps, but no longer dangerous. They drank in companionable silence, the fire crackling, the world outside softened by fog and rain. At last, Tuppence set down her cup, her eyes dancing with mischief. Tell me, Tommy, what would you do if there were a knock at our door tonight, just as the clock struck midnight? He groaned theatrically, sinking lower in his chair. I'd bolt the door, pull the blankets over my head, and pretend I hadn't heard. But you wouldn't, she teased. You'd grumble, you'd fuss, and then you'd open it, because you'd know I'd never forgive you if we missed the start of another adventure. He met her gaze, weary but smiling. And that, my dear Tuppence, is precisely why I dread midnight knocks, because you'd never let them go unanswered. The clock chimed the hour, gentle and harmless. No knock followed, only the steady rhythm of rain against the panes, the safe glow of their fire, and the unspoken knowledge that adventures, whether sought or thrust upon them, would come again. For now, there was peace. But in the Beresfords' world, peace was merely the pause between mysteries.